Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargav, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In this episode, we talk about the reports claiming that Instagram is bad for the body image and mental health of teenage girls. We also talk about why the Naga peace talks have once again hit a roadblock. But first, we talk about the Punjab crisis. It was only a few days back that Punjab saw a new chief minister being appointed under the Congress leadership in the state. It was Captain Amrinder Singh who resigned and was replaced by Charanjit Singh Channi. And this had happened in large part because of Congress leader Navjot Singh Sidhu. Sidhu was the one who had openly criticized Amrinder Singh for his leadership, got the party to appoint him as the chief of the Punjab Pradesh Congress Committee, and then later had given his stamp of approval for the appointment of Charanjit Singh Channi. But on Tuesday, Sidhu abruptly resigned from his post. This happened only minutes after portfolios were allocated to ministers in the new state governments headed by the new chief minister. In this segment, we speak to Kanchan Vasudev, who writes on Punjab for the Indian Express about this ongoing political crisis. So Kanchan, what is the reason that Sidhu has now resigned from his post as the chief of the PPCC, that is the Punjab Pradesh Congress Committee?
He was an aspirant for the chief minister himself. So after Amrinder had resigned, that time party had thought that they would be naming Sunil Jakhar as next CM of Punjab. And then Sidhu and another guy whose name is Sukhjinder Randhawa, he's the deputy CM now. He and Sidhu both objected to the candidature of Sunil Jakhar. Sidhu said that if they have to change the CM now, then why can't Sidhu be the CM? But the party didn't want to expose him, thinking that it is too soon for him to be a CM. They should keep him for the next election because he's considered a popular leader and he can pull a lot of crowds, and the youths of Punjab, they quite like him. So that is why they thought that they would be better off if he's saved for the election. So when this Jakhar's name cropped up, then these people objected to it. Then they thought that they would bring Sukhjinder Randhawa as the next candidate, who is a Jat Sikh. Then also Sidhu protested, saying that if there is a Jat Sikh, then it should be him and why anybody else, because then unnecessarily they would have another contender for the post in the next elections. So then the party came up with the compromise candidate in the form of Charanjit Channi, who's a Dalit leader, and Sidhu didn't have any objection to him, thinking that in Punjab the precedent has been that a Jat Sikh becomes the CM, so in the next election he would obviously be the candidate for the CM's post. But now what has happened that Sidhu, it is learned, that didn't want Sukhjinder Randhawa to become the Home Minister. The party has given him the Home Department.
This is after the new portfolios were handed out to ministers in the new government under Channi.
Yes. So Randhawa has been given the Home Department. That hasn't gone down well with Sidhu. He's been wanting that the CMs should retain it because, obvious reasons that if Sukhjinder Randhawa performs on it, there have been certain promises which have to be delivered by the Home Department, which was under Captain Amrinder Singh earlier. So if Sukhi Randhawa delivers, then he would be considered a strong and effective leader in Punjab. So that is one of the reasons. Then Sidhu is also having issues with the DG, Mr. Iqbal Preet Singh Sahota. And then he has got the issues with the Advocate General also, APS Deol. He's been saying that the Advocate General was a lawyer to former DGP Sumed Singh Saini, who is facing trial in a case filed against him by Punjab Vigilance Bureau. So Saini's lawyer was APS Deol, and Saini had got bail when the government had snapped that case against him. So this is what Sidhu has been saying, that when all those people who were responsible for making the government lose the case, why should he be on that post? So this is what he's been saying.
And Sidhu also protested against another minister in the cabinet who had been accused of being involved in the sand mining scam. And after he resigned, he also released a video that he put out on social media. What stood out for you in that video?
In the video, he's been saying that he won't be compromising on his ethics. He's all for the clean and transparent government. And that is why the previous government led by Captain Amrinder Singh, the CM was removed because the system was corrupt and he wanted all above board people And then again, he's talking about AG and DG in that video, saying that why should those people be there? And without naming the minister, of course, and without naming the DG, of course, he's saying that some leaders, they were tainted and they're back in the cabinet. And why was that system to be changed if the entire thing continues again and again? So he's saying that it's better that he quit rather than being a part of that system.
Also, Kanchan, there were others who had handed their resignations along with Sidhu. Does this mean that Sidhu might be gaining more clout?
Actually, another cabinet minister, Razia Sultana, she was the only minister who resigned along with Sidhu in solidarity with him. And the other people were like the general secretary of PCC, who was appointed by Sidhu himself, then the treasurer, then another general secretary. So those resignations do not mean much. But yes, of course, this cabinet minister, Razia Sultana's resignation means a lot because obviously a minister has gone and backed Sidhu. But then there is a close eye of Sidhu in Pargat Singh, who's a hockey Olympian. He's been with Sidhu all along, but he is still there in the cabinet. He has not resigned. Then another MLA, whose name is Amrinder Singh Rajawarding. Sidhu had pushed for him also to be the cabinet minister. He has also not resigned. So both of them not resigning and not any other minister resigning either. That means that it's not much of a clout there.
Also, the thing is that Sidhu, had been lying low up until a few months back. And then he began to openly criticize the former Chief Minister Amrinder Singh and then managed to become the PPCC chief. He got the central leadership to do that. So what is about him that he's able to do this? He's able to sulk, throw tantrums, and is able to get the party to take him seriously.
Actually, he's considered a popular leader. And he's a crowd puller. He's liked by people in Punjab because he has been promising clean government. He enjoys a clean image. There is no allegation of corruption against him. And he's been also coming up with several schemes and has been advising the government in the past that there is a sand mining issue in which is like hundreds of crores worth business in Punjab. But the Punjab government gets only rupees 300 crore every year from this. So he's been saying that if there is no nexus between the sand mafia and the government, then Punjab can make a lot of money. So these kind of plans he has been making, which augur very well with the people. So that is how they quite like him. He knows that he's popular, so he wants to, with his resignation, he's always trying to convey that he's the popular leader and if he goes, then the party will suffer and.
And the other thing that happened was that Sidhu resigned from his post on the day when Kanhaiya Kumar and Jignesh Mevani were to join the Congress party. How did the central leadership react to that?
So that has not gone down well with the party. Whenever there is a function at somebody's house and somebody tries to overshadow it with something else, then obviously nobody's going to like it. This is how it has been. So that's an important thing that he tried to dim it.
And yesterday, Chief Minister Charanjit Singh Channi invited Sidhu for a dialogue. Did a meeting finally take place between the two?
Actually, no meeting has taken place ever since. Sidhu is there sitting at his residence and the party high command has sent their central observer in Harish Chaudhary to Chandigarh. He's sitting here and he's been talking to MLAs, taking feedback on would they like Sidhu to be the PCC chief and what is the popularity now ever since Channi has taken over, because people are now liking Channi also. Our party leader was telling me today morning that Channi comes across as a serious guy. He's very sincere. He's promising and he knows how to conduct himself with sobriety and seriously. So they're saying that he's been a good choice.
Also, the other big news that came out later in the evening was that Captain Amrinder Singh met Home Minister Amit Shah. It's obviously too soon to comment on anything, but does the meeting come as a surprise?
In fact, it has not been a surprise because ever since Captain resigned, he's been saying that he's been keeping his options open. And there were reports that he could be either joining the BJP or floating his own party in Punjab because he's been saying that he won't let Sidhu become the chief minister of Punjab. He's a dangerous man. He's anti-national. He's been branding him that way. And when Captain went and met Amit Shah, before that also, there were reports that he's studying the farm laws and he was taking legal opinions that if the centre government repeals the farm laws, then how it could be done and what could be the best bargain out of it. He's been studying that. So everybody knew that he would be going and meeting the BJP leaders over there. And after the meeting, his media advisor's tweet also came that he went and met Amit Shah, and they discussed the farm laws. So this was in the offing. Everybody knew that this was coming.
Dear listeners, before we start the next segment, a quick announcement. Our regular listeners would know that we at Indian Express have been collaborating with Germany's international broadcaster DW on Love Matters with Evelyn Sharma, a podcast on love and relationships. Its first episode was actually released yesterday, and you can find the link to it in today's show notes. Now, one of the future episodes of the show is going to be on disability and dating in India. The idea behind it is to have a conversation around the stigma disabled people face when it comes to exploring love, relationships, and their sexuality. So if you're someone who identifies as a disabled person or know someone who does, do write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com with Love Matters in the subject line and share with us what challenges you face when it comes to love and dating. Now, back to the show. And next we talk about Instagram, the social media company owned by Facebook. Today, Facebook's global head of safety is going to appear before the US Senate Commerce Subcommittee on the issue of protecting kids online and the mental health harm that teenagers face on Instagram. This is happening after a recent report published in the Wall Street Journal talks about how Instagram, which has over 1 billion users, negatively impacts girls in their teens. In this segment, Shruti Dhapola, who writes on technology for the Indian Express, joins us to talk about this issue. Shruti, Instagram, which is owned by Facebook, is under scrutiny right now because of how the app impacts teen girls and their mental health. Could you talk about the reason behind this scrutiny?
Well, the reason Instagram is facing this scrutiny is because of a Wall Street Journal report, which is actually based on Facebook's own internal research, which showed that Instagram was negatively impacting its teenage audiences. And the reason it matters is that a lot of Instagram's audience is teenagers, and they're the ones who are likely spending a lot more time on it. Facebook's study showed, for instance, that in case of teenage girl, the app probably made their body image issues worse. For instance, one of the slides from Instagram's research showed that the body image issues were made worse for 1 out of 3 teen girls who were surveyed. Another slide said that the teens blamed the app for increasing anxiety and depression. A fair percentage of users that they spoke to actually said that they reported suicidal thoughts and linked them to Instagram. This is again teen users, not users across the age groups, but rather teen users in the UK and in America. And users, again, teenagers also felt that they were feeling unattractive and that those feelings actually began using on the app. The Wall Street Journal also spoke to several teenage girls for this report who pointed out how using Instagram made their body image issues worse, and in some cases it led to eating disorders as well.
And one of the things that is being highlighted is that Facebook knew about this but did not make these reports public. And Facebook, of course, has disputed the claims made by the Wall Street Journal, and the company has even come out with a detailed response. So what is Facebook saying as part of its defense?
So yeah, Facebook is obviously disputing WSJ's claims. Facebook Vice President and Head of Research, Prariti Raychaudhuri, wrote a detailed blog post, and they basically accused the publication of, cherry-picking facts. Their excuse is that this research is done to, minimize the bad on their platforms and maximize the good. And regarding the body image issues in girls, and that the app was toxic for girls, she said that their research actually showed that 11 out of 12 well-being issues, teenage girls who said they struggled with those difficult issues also said that Instagram made them better rather than worse. It's a bit of a convoluted answer, but what basically Facebook and Instagram is saying is that, look, we aren't making these issues worse for teenage girls, we're actually making it better, except on the issue of body image, where Instagram seems to admit that, yeah, they have kind of made it worse. But they were keen to point out that out of 12 well-being issues, on 11, they were doing better than what the Wall Street Journal report was claiming. They also said that teens blaming Instagram for increasing anxiety and depression, which was another thing that was highlighted in the report, was actually based on inputs of only 40 teens. Now, when you look at this number and the app has more than 1 billion users, Of course, responses from just 40 users will not be representative of what everyone might be feel on the app. And I should also highlight that Facebook has actually not publicly released all the data around its research on the app. So they've only pointed out some issues that they've had with the Wall Street Journal report and said that what Wall Street Journal is reporting is not the full story.
But in the middle of all this, Facebook has stopped the launch of Instagram Kids, which, as the name suggests, is going to be an app specifically for kids. What is the company saying is the reason it has taken that decision?
So Instagram Kids, as you know, right now, in order to use Instagram, you need to be 13 years old or above. And Instagram was preparing to launch a kids app, which would have been for children between the ages of 10 to 12. And the reason Instagram is saying that they're stopping this is not because they think that this isn't the right thing to do, but because they think that they need to talk more to parents, experts, and policymakers. And they're also under increased scrutiny. Remember, Facebook's head of safety and security is actually going to be answering to the US Senate committee around the issue of protecting kids online and the mental harm that teens face on the platform. And again, that committee's report is also based on the WSJ report as well. So Facebook is already going to be answering some tough questions, and it could explain why they've put a pause on the Instagram Kids app. Instagram head Adam Mosseri also wrote that kids are getting phones at a much younger age now, and they're misrepresenting their age and downloading apps that are meant for those who are 13 or above. And that's why they really wanted to launch an app just for these kids who are not really teenagers, but still want to use Instagram. And they had said that this kids version of Instagram would have more parental control and supervision. And Facebook is insisting that this doesn't mean that because they've paused the app, it's not a bad idea. But the app would have no ads. It would have been more age appropriate for those children between the ages of 10 to 12 years.
Also, when talking about body image issues and mental health issues, we've heard this about other social media apps too, right? But what is the reason that Instagram in particular is being focused on right now?
As we've noted that like all social media studies have shown that most social media websites are in some way or the other contributing to anxiety and depression. And it's not just teens who are impacted, right? Like if you spend a large amount of your time just on social media sites, I mean, it does seem to have a negative impact, irrespective of age. But the reason Instagram is getting special focus is because there's definitely, it's a very growing platform. It has overtaken Facebook as well. It's definitely a lot more addictive. And Instagram has its emphasis on best moments. You do it for the gram, where you need to look a certain way. It's heavily curated. Even the filters are always about either, lightening the skin tone or lightening your eyes. And there's definitely the dominance of influencers on Instagram who are promoting a very glamorous lifestyle. Now, all of this for teens who might be struggling with self-worth, this can be a very potent combination. And one of the researchers even told WSJ that, look, Instagram is like a drug and it needs to be studied. And there have been reports that when it comes to body issues, Instagram is impacting not just teenage girls, but also adult women. For instance, UK's National Health Service actually wrote a scathing letter in May this year slamming Instagram for not cracking down on the promotions of a drug called Aptamin. Now, this is actually a weight gain drug. It's badly being peddled by many influencers on the platform. Many women are using it because they want to gain weight, because they want to look more curvaceous. And while Instagram said that, look, we've taken down the accounts to sell and advertise, those still continue to be there. So there's definitely some problems with Instagram. And it's the place where everyone wants to maintain an image. And it definitely has a lot of pressures, especially for teens. And that's exactly what the US Senate will be asking Facebook executives about.
And in the end, we talk about the Naga peace talks, which once again have hit a roadblock. Last week, Tamil Nadu Governor R.N. Ravi resigned as the interlocutor for the Naga peace talks. Sources say the government was unhappy with the way he had been handling the peace talks, and this included him openly disagreeing with one of the key Nagaland stakeholders. In this segment, Indian Express's Deeptiman Tiwari joins us to talk about the reasons behind this disagreement and the way forward for the talks now. Deeptiman, before we talk about why R.N. Ravi resigned, let's talk about the Naga peace talks themselves. These are talks that have been happening between the government of India and the Naga insurgent groups. And they are essentially trying to settle disputes that date back to the British Raj. What is the main dispute between the two sides?
Look, it is basically rooted in the idea of Naga nationalism, which is older than India's independence. In fact, Nagas had told British India that you please leave us alone. We don't want to do anything with you. And British also had very little interest in the Naga areas because, in fact, the only reason they had gone to the northeast was to grow tea. And so they basically needed the plains of Assam and not really the hills. So Nagas always considered themselves as a sovereign entity, not part of British India, not part of independent India ever. And this idea of Naga nationalism was about not just the present day Nagaland, but all Naga inhabited areas in the northeast and even in Myanmar. So you have parts of Manipur, you have parts of Arunachal. So all of that, apart from Nagaland and parts of Myanmar, which they consider as part of what they call as the Greater Nagalim. So that's where it is rooted. And Nagaland had declared independence on August 14, 1947, its own independence. They, in fact, formed their own army in 1952 and their own sovereign government, which obviously India disputed. And since then, basically, this dispute has been going on and it took the shape of Naga insurgency, which is as old as, again, India's independence. And India has been, since then, trying to bring these various insurgent groups to the negotiating table so that a peace deal can be reached, because it has been the longest running insurgency in the country.
Right, and talks have been going on between the Indian government and the largest and most influential Naga insurgent group, the National Socialist Council of Nagaland, its Isak Muiva faction. It had even signed a ceasefire agreement with the Indian government in 1997, and since then there have been more than 100 rounds of talks, but a Naga peace accord has not been signed. And in August 2015, the group even came up with a framework for the Naga Peace Accord. But what is the reason that despite coming up with a framework, things have not been finalized?
Yeah, there are multiple reasons for the Naga Peace Accord to have been delayed for so long despite so many rounds of talks. In part, it is rooted in, again, the idea of Naga sovereignty and nationalism, where they have been demanding themselves to be a sovereign entity which coexists with India. For a long time, they have wanted their own constitution. They have wanted their own flag, which a constitution and sovereignty have been obviously not been acceptable to India. And India has multiple times said that this is not going to happen. We cannot have a sovereign entity within Indian territory, and we cannot let you have your own constitution either. Then there is the issue of the Greater Nagalim. Now, that will open a Pandora's box. If you start demanding regions from Manipur and Arunachal Pradesh, there'll be massive political furore over it. That again is not something that can be granted. So obviously, the talks have been held to basically reach a middle ground where both the sides can take a step forward and agree onto something, such as maybe making autonomous councils of Naga inhabited regions and maybe giving some things that for certain occasions you can use a Naga flag or whatever. Obviously, constitution is non-negotiable. You cannot have your own constitution. But certain other forms of liberties and specific laws, protections can be given. So all those talks have been going on. However, what cleared the pitch was after the framework agreement was signed and the talks said to have been concluded in October 2019, there were very sharp exchanges between then Naga interlocutor RN Ravi and NSC and IM, and there were open, sharp exchanges where both threw barbs at each other. This totally cleared the pitch for talks. Perhaps Mr. RN Ravi was a little frustrated at the Naga talks not being concluded even after so many rounds of talks and a framework agreement having been signed, and it had already been 4 years. In fact, at that very time, after conclusion of the talks, he had said that NSC and IM, and he had publicly done this in a statement, that NSC and IM was having a procrastinating attitude to delay the conclusion of the talks.
Yeah, and you write that after that, he also called the group an armed gang, that they were running a parallel government under the shadow of guns, and he had been openly criticizing NSC and IM. And then NSC and IM also hardened their stance and the talks could not move forward. But apart from the rigid stand that both sides had taken, were there any other issues as well?
So there are views within the security establishment that the framework agreement itself was not exactly drafted in a very thoughtful way. It left a lot of room for ambiguity, which is why there was a difference of understanding about the framework agreement between the Indian government and NSE and IM. Today, both are interpreting the same framework agreement in different ways. NSE and IM is saying that it is very clear in the framework agreement that we will coexist with India as a sovereign nation. And India is saying that there is no such thing. But when you read the framework agreement, you can't really make out who is lying. So, in a way, one could say that it was poorly drafted, which left room for so much of ambiguity that both sides are now taking their own respective positions, which is not exactly a great atmosphere for negotiation.
And Deeptiman, the Naga groups demanding greater Nagalim and their own constitution, their own sovereignty, these are the demands that the Indian government doesn't want to agree on and is likely that it won't agree on. So what is the way forward that we see for these talks now?
You see, for all these demands that NSE and IM has been making for decades, some sort of a middle ground has to be found. For example, if they're demanding a greater Nagalim, perhaps the government can provide for autonomous councils of Naga inhabited areas so that they can have autonomy over their region. After all, there are so many autonomous regions in the Northeast. It won't be something new that the Indian government will be granting. Similarly, there could be some sort of, for certain occasions, you can allow Naga flag to be used. You can give some sort of, within Nagaland, you'll have to figure out how you're going to rehabilitate NSE and IM cadres. Because if that insurgency has to end, then those cadres have to be adjusted somewhere. So you have to figure out some paramilitary force or something where these people can be adjusted, how they are going to be absorbed. Then there will be the issue on the administration front. What kind of reservations, what kind of representation can you give to the people who have been fighting for Naga nationalism or sovereignty? So it could be done through reservations in the assembly or a structure of the assembly where these administrative autonomies can be granted to these groups who have been struggling for decades so that they can be brought back into the mainstream and be a part of the Nagaland administration. And it has to be inclusive because it's not just NSE and IM, there are multiple groups, all have to be accommodated. So it's not going to be an easy task. That is why a new interlocutor he has not been officially appointed, but for the past couple of years, ever since relations strained between NSE and IM and R.N. Ravi, Akshay Mishra, former Special Director with Intelligence Bureau, has been dealing with Naga groups, including the NSE and IM, and he has to take it forward now and figure out as to what is going to be a middle ground and acceptable solution which is going to be agreeable to both the Indian government and NSE and IM.
You were listening to Three Things by The Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargav, and was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.